The crowd at the Silver Creek auction house fell silent as Dahlia Price stepped onto the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her fair skin. The year was 1876, and in the unforgiving Arizona Territory, a woman with no family and mounting debts had few options. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty square as Dahlia kept her head high, refusing to let the tears gathering behind her eyes fall. She had never imagined her life would come to this, being sold to pay off her late father's gambling debts. $500 for the schoolteacher, the auctioneer called out, his voice thick with tobacco and whiskey. Educated woman can read and write, good for housekeeping or teaching your young ones. The bidding began slowly, mostly from weathered ranchers looking for a housekeeper or aging widowers seeking a wife. Dahlia shuddered at each call, each increase in price feeling like another nail in the coffin of her freedom. Her father had been dead barely 2 weeks, and the creditors had descended like vultures, caring nothing for her grief or the fact that she'd known nothing of his debts. 700, called a voice from the back, and the crowd parted to reveal a man in a pristine black coat, a silver star pinned to his chest. Sheriff Zachary Thornton was new to Silver Creek, having arrived from back east just 6 months prior. Tall and imposing, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut through the desert dust, he commanded respect wherever he went. The crowd murmured. The sheriff himself bidding on an indentured woman was unusual, even scandalous. Dahlia felt her face flush with humiliation as the man approached the platform, his spurs jingling with each confident step. 800. Another voice called, belonging to Elias Green, the owner of the saloon at the edge of town. His reputation for cruelty to his employees was well known. $1,000, Sheriff Thornton countered without hesitation, his voice calm and measured. The auctioneer looked around the square, but no one dared outbid the sheriff. The gavel came down with finality. Sold to Sheriff Thornton for $1,000. Dahlia felt her legs weaken beneath her as the sheriff approached and took the rope from the auctioneer's hands. She had taught the children of Silver Creek for 2 years, had held their respect and that of their parents. Now she was property, sold to a man she barely knew beyond his official capacity. As Sheriff Thornton led her away from the auction block, whispers and stares followed them down the main street toward the jailhouse. Dahlia kept her eyes fixed on the ground, unable to meet the pitying glances of those who had once greeted her as Miss Price. Once inside the sheriff's office, he closed the door firmly behind them, shutting out the curious onlookers. He moved to his desk, retrieving a knife from the drawer. Dahlia instinctively stepped back, fear coursing through her. "Hold still, Miss Price," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he cut the ropes binding her wrists. "I apologize for the spectacle out there." Rubbing her raw skin, Dahlia finally found her voice. "Why did you do this, Sheriff?" "What do you want from me?" Sheriff Thornton sighed, returning the knife to his desk. "I couldn't stand by and watch you go to Green. The man is a snake. So instead I belong to you now." Dahlia couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Thornton opened it to reveal a young man with sun-bleached hair and the weathered face of someone who spent his days in the saddle. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but the gun at his hip was well maintained. "You sent for me, Sheriff?" The cowboy asked, his eyes flickering curiously to Dahlia. "Caleb, this is Miss Price. Miss Price, this is Caleb Foster, one of my deputies." The cowboy tipped his hat. "Madam," Sheriff Thornton continued, "Caleb, I need you to escort Miss Price to my house and make sure she's settled in." Dahlia's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Your house? I'm not going to be your—" The sheriff raised a hand, cutting her off. Miss Price, I have no dishonorable intentions. My house has a spare room where you'll stay until we sort this out. You'll be safe there. Sort what out? Dahlia asked, confusion mingling with her indignation. The sheriff exchanged a glance with his deputy before turning back to her. Those debt collectors had no legal right to sell you. What happened today was unlawful, but challenging it openly would put you in danger. Caleb nodded, his expression serious. There's more going on in this town than meets the eye, Miss Price. The sheriff's trying to get to the bottom of it. You'll be free by dawn, the cowboy said, his voice low but firm. The sheriff has a plan. Dahlia looked between the two men, trying to discern their true intentions. Sheriff Thornton's face remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her want to trust him. Why would you help me? She finally asked. You don't even know me. I know enough, the sheriff replied. You're a respected teacher who's fallen victim to corruption. That's reason enough. He picked up his hat from the desk. I have matters to attend to. Caleb will see you safely to my house and explain more. As the sheriff left, Dahlia turned to Caleb, still uncertain. Is he telling the truth? The cowboy nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Sheriff Thornton is a good man, Miss Price. He came to clean up this town, and that's exactly what he's doing. He gestured to the door. Shall we go? It's not safe for you to be seen lingering here. With few alternatives, Dahlia followed the deputy out a back door of the jailhouse, her mind racing with questions about what had just happened and what fate actually awaited her. The sheriff's house sat on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a modest but well-maintained two-story structure with a small garden that looked surprisingly tended in the harsh desert environment. Caleb escorted Dahlia through the front door, explaining that Sheriff Thornton had purchased the property from the previous sheriff, who had left town under mysterious circumstances. The sheriff doesn't spend much time here, Caleb said as he showed her through the house. Mostly sleeps at the office. Says it keeps him closer to trouble when it breaks out. The spare room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small dresser. A window overlooked the back of the property where a few horses grazed in a corral. There are some women's things in the dresser, Caleb said, noticing her questioning look. Sheriff's sister visited from back east last month, left some clothes that might fit you. The sheriff has a sister, Dahlia asked, realizing how little she knew about the man who now legally owned her. Yes, madam, Mrs. Rebecca Porter came to check on him after his wife passed. This new information caught Dahlia by surprise. His wife, Caleb nodded solemnly. Consumption took her just before he accepted the position here. Guess he needed the change of scenery. Dahlia sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. Deputy Foster, please tell me what's really happening. Why did the sheriff buy me only to set me free? The cowboy leaned against the doorframe, pushing his hat back slightly. There's been something rotten in Silver Creek for a while now. Sheriff's been investigating a ring of corrupt businessmen who have been squeezing folks dry, then selling them into servitude when they can't pay. Your father wasn't the only one who got caught in their trap. But my father did gamble, Dahlia said. I found the markers after he died. Maybe so, but did he gamble enough to owe $3,000? That's what they claimed he owed, though the sheriff only paid $1,000 for you. Dahlia felt her blood run cold. $3,000? That's impossible. We barely had enough to keep the house. Exactly. They inflate the debts, then take everything: homes, businesses, sometimes even people. Caleb's eyes hardened. The sheriff's been building a case against them for months, but he needs evidence. That's where you come in. Me, how could I help? Your father kept books, didn't he? As a merchant, Dahlia nodded. Yes, ledgers for the store, but the creditors took everything when they took the house. Not everything, Caleb said with a knowing smile. Sheriff had me retrieve your father's hidden ledger before they could find it. Your pa was smarter than they gave him credit for. Hope flickered inside Dahlia for the first time that day. So if you have evidence of their fraud, why am I here instead of back in my home? Because as far as they know, you've been sold and are no longer a threat. If you suddenly appeared free in town, they'd know something was wrong. He straightened up. Sheriff Thornton needs a day or two to get the federal marshal here with the arrest warrants. Until then, you need to stay hidden. Dahlia absorbed this information, relief washing over her that she wasn't truly being held as property, but also anger at what had been done to her and apparently others in Silver Creek. So what happens now? Now you rest, Miss Price. It's been a difficult day. Caleb moved to leave, then paused. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Sheriff will be back later tonight to check on you. After Caleb left, Dahlia explored the house, finding it neat and sparsely decorated, with few personal touches except for a small photograph on the mantel of a dark-haired woman with a gentle smile. The sheriff's late wife, she presumed. She found herself wondering what kind of man Zachary Thornton was behind the badge, a man who would spend $1,000 to save a woman he barely knew from indentured servitude. As dusk fell, Dahlia prepared a simple meal from the provisions in the kitchen, setting aside portions for the sheriff. She had just finished washing the dishes when she heard the front door open. Sheriff Thornton entered, removing his hat and looking surprised to find her in the kitchen. Miss Price, you didn't need to cook. You're a guest here, not a servant. I needed the distraction, she replied honestly, and I wasn't raised to sit idle while others provide for me. I left food for you. He seemed about to protest, but then nodded his thanks. Caleb explained the situation. He did. I appreciate what you're doing, Sheriff, though I wish it hadn't come to this. Sheriff Thornton sat at the kitchen table, fatigue evident in the slump of his shoulders. So do I, Miss Price, so do I. As he ate, Dahlia watched him, trying to reconcile this tired man with the imposing figure who had commanded the auction earlier. May I ask you something, Sheriff? He looked up. Of course. Why go to all this trouble? Surely there are easier ways to gather evidence than buying a woman at auction. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Perhaps, but none that would ensure your safety, and I couldn't let another innocent person suffer at their hands. His eyes darkened. They've taken too much already. Caleb mentioned your wife, Dahlia said softly. I'm sorry for your loss. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Emma got sick shortly after we uncovered similar corruption in our hometown in Pennsylvania. The stress of the threats, the trial, it weakened her. By the time the doctor diagnosed the consumption, it was too late. He looked up at Dahlia. I couldn't save her, but I can try to save this town. The raw honesty in his voice touched something in Dahlia. I think she would be proud of what you're doing. Sheriff Thornton finished his meal in silence, then stood. You should get some rest, Miss Price. Tomorrow will be another long day. Lock your door tonight just as a precaution. Do you expect trouble? I always expect trouble, he said, his hand unconsciously moving to the gun at his hip. But Caleb will be keeping watch outside tonight, so you're safe. As Sheriff Thornton turned to leave, Dahlia called after him. Sheriff, he paused, looking back. Thank you for today. Not many would have done what you did. He nodded once, his expression softening just slightly. Good night, Miss Price. Dahlia retired to her room, locking the door as instructed. Through the window, she could see Caleb's silhouette as he patrolled the property, his rifle slung across his back. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, she felt strangely secure knowing these two men were protecting her. As she settled into bed, Dahlia found herself wondering about Zachary Thornton's life before Silver Creek, about the woman in the photograph, and about the pain he carried beneath his composed exterior. There was more to the sheriff than met the eye, and despite everything that had happened that day, Dahlia found herself curious to learn more. Dawn broke with a knock at Dahlia's door. She opened it to find Sheriff Thornton already dressed and alert, though the shadows under his eyes suggested he'd slept little. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Green's men were asking questions at the saloon last night about your whereabouts. Someone must have tipped them off." Dahlia felt her heart race. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to move you. Get dressed quickly and pack whatever you need. Caleb's saddling the horses." Within minutes, Dahlia had changed into one of the dresses left by the sheriff's sister, a practical riding outfit that fit well enough, and joined Sheriff Thornton outside where Caleb waited with 3 horses. "Where are we going?" she asked as the sheriff helped her mount a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "My family has a hunting cabin about 15 miles north in the foothills," he explained, swinging up onto his own horse, a powerful black stallion. "You'll be safe there until the marshal arrives." They set out as the sun crested the horizon, riding swiftly through the scrubland that surrounded Silver Creek. Dahlia, who had learned to ride as a child, kept pace with the men, though the jarring motion of the horse reminded her how long it had been since she'd been in a saddle. "Sheriff," Caleb called out as they crested a small rise, "riders behind us." Sheriff Thornton pulled up, removing a spyglass from his saddlebag. After a moment of observation, his expression hardened. "Green's men, 4 of them. How far back?" Dahlia asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "About 2 miles and closing. They're pushing their horses hard." He turned to Caleb. "Take Miss Price to the cabin. I'll lead them away and circle back." "Zach, that's too dangerous," Caleb protested. "There are 4 of them." "Which is why Miss Price needs you with her. I know these hills better than they do. I'll be fine." Before Caleb could argue further, Sheriff Thornton handed him a folded piece of paper. "The location of the cabin. If I'm not there by nightfall, take her to Marshal Jenkins in Tucson. He knows about our investigation." He turned to Dahlia, his expression softening slightly. "Trust Caleb. He'll keep you safe." Without waiting for a response, Sheriff Thornton wheeled his horse around and galloped off to the east, away from their intended path. Dahlia watched him go, an unexpected worry gripping her heart. "He'll be all right, Miss Price," Caleb assured her, though his own concern was evident. "Sheriff's the toughest man I know." They continued northward, pushing their horses as fast as they dared through the increasingly rocky terrain. Dahlia's thoughts kept returning to Sheriff Thornton, riding alone to face 4 armed men. The man was either incredibly brave or foolishly reckless, perhaps both. By midday, they reached a stream where they stopped briefly to water the horses and rest. Caleb kept a vigilant watch while Dahlia stretched her aching legs. "How did you come to work for Sheriff Thornton?" she asked, curious about the obvious loyalty between the 2 men. Caleb smiled slightly, his eyes still scanning their surroundings. "He saved my life. I was working as a ranch hand up near Prescott when some cattle rustlers hit us. I got shot trying to stop them. Sheriff, he wasn't sheriff then, just a bounty hunter passing through, tracked down the gang and brought me to a doctor." He adjusted his hat. "After I recovered, I asked if I could ride with him. Been doing so ever since." "He seems to make a habit of rescuing people," Dahlia observed. "It's who he is," Caleb said simply. "Never met a man with a stronger sense of justice." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they entered the foothills. Pine trees began to appear among the scrub, and the air grew cooler with the elevation. As the sun began its descent, they finally reached a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood nestled against the hillside, partially hidden by trees. "Sheriff's father built this place," Caleb explained as they dismounted. Used to bring Zach here hunting when he was a boy. Inside, the cabin was simple but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with chairs and basic cooking implements. A ladder led to a small loft with a bed, while a second narrow bed occupied one corner of the main room. "You can take the loft," Caleb said, bringing in their saddlebags. "I'll sleep down here by the door." Dahlia climbed the ladder to inspect the loft, finding the bed made up with clean, if slightly musty, blankets. Through a small window, she could see the path they had traveled, winding down through the trees. She searched the horizon for any sign of Sheriff Thornton, but saw only the lengthening shadows of evening. As darkness fell, Caleb lit a small fire in the fireplace and prepared a meal from the provisions they had brought. They ate in relative silence, both listening for the sound of approaching hoofbeats. "He should have been here by now," Dahlia finally said, voicing the concern that had been building all afternoon. Caleb nodded, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with tension. "Yes, he should have. What will we do if he doesn't come?" "We'll wait until morning," Caleb decided after a moment. "If he's not here by then, we'll head to Tucson as he instructed." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Caleb kept watch by the window, rifle at the ready, while Dahlia tried to distract herself by exploring the cabin. On a crude shelf, she found a small collection of books, mostly dime novels and practical guides, but also a dog-eared copy of the Odyssey that had clearly been read many times. Inside the cover was an inscription: "To Zach, may you always find your way home. Love, Emma." The personal glimpse into Sheriff Thornton's life made Dahlia feel like an intruder, and she carefully returned the book to its place. She was about to retire to the loft when a sound outside made both her and Caleb freeze. "Someone's coming," Caleb whispered, moving to the door with his gun drawn. They waited in tense silence until 3 distinct knocks sounded, followed by 2 more, a signal. Caleb visibly relaxed, holstering his gun and opening the door to reveal Sheriff Thornton, disheveled and sporting a bloody gash on his forehead, but very much alive. "You're hurt," Dahlia exclaimed, rushing forward without thinking. "It's nothing," he said, though he winced as he stepped inside. "Just a graze." Caleb helped him to a chair while Dahlia retrieved water and a clean cloth from their supplies. As she gently cleaned the wound, Sheriff Thornton recounted what had happened. "I led them on a wild chase through the canyon lands, lost 2 of them when they tried to take a shortcut through a ravine that's impassable this time of year." "And the other 2?" Caleb asked. "Persistent." "One got off a lucky shot that caught me as I rounded a bend. I doubled back and managed to disarm them, left them on foot about 10 miles from here with enough water to get back to town if they're smart about it." Dahlia shook her head in disbelief. "You could have been killed." "It was a calculated risk," Sheriff Thornton replied, his eyes meeting hers, "and worth taking to ensure your safety." There was something in his gaze that made Dahlia look away, suddenly conscious of how close she was standing to him as she tended his wound. She stepped back, composing herself. "The cut isn't deep, but head wounds bleed a lot. You should rest." Sheriff Thornton nodded, fatigue evident in his posture. "I'll take first watch. You 2 get some sleep." Caleb and Dahlia exchanged a glance, both recognizing the stubbornness in his tone. "At least eat something first," Dahlia insisted, moving to warm up the remaining stew. As the 3 of them shared the simple meal, Sheriff Thornton explained the next steps in his plan. "The federal marshal should arrive in Silver Creek tomorrow. Once he sees the evidence in your father's ledger and hears your testimony, he can issue arrests for Green and his associates." "What about the other people they've cheated?" Dahlia asked. "Can they get justice too?" "That's the goal. With their operation exposed, the courts can invalidate the debt contracts. It won't bring back what people have lost, but it will stop others from suffering the same fate. After the meal, despite his protests, Sheriff Thornton finally agreed to rest while Caleb took first watch. Dahlia retreated to the loft, but sleep eluded her. Through the floorboards, she could hear the murmur of conversation between the two men, occasionally catching phrases like "too dangerous" and "worth the risk." She found herself thinking about Zachary Thornton's willingness to put himself in harm's way for justice for her. It was a rare quality in a world where most people looked out only for themselves. Even rarer was his lack of expectation for gratitude or reward. Eventually, the cabin fell silent except for the soft crackle of the dying fire. Dahlia drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams filled with auctions and chases, and a pair of intense blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Morning brought a sense of urgency as they prepared to return to Silver Creek. The plan was for Caleb to escort Dahlia to a meeting point outside town where the federal marshal would take her statement, while Sheriff Thornton went ahead to coordinate the arrests. As they saddled the horses, Sheriff Thornton pulled Dahlia aside. "Are you certain you're willing to testify? Once you do, Green and his men will know you were involved in bringing them down." "They took everything from me," Dahlia replied firmly. "My home, my dignity, nearly my freedom. If my testimony can help stop them from doing the same to others, then yes, I'm certain." A look of respect crossed his face. "You're braver than many men I've known, Miss Price." They rode hard through the morning, taking a different route back towards Silver Creek that avoided open country where they might be spotted. By early afternoon, they reached a small abandoned mining camp that was to serve as their meeting point with the marshal. "Caleb will stay with you," Sheriff Thornton said as they dismounted. "I need to get back to town to make sure everything's in place." "Be careful," Dahlia said, surprising herself with the emotion in her voice. "Green's men will be looking for you." "I'm always careful," he replied with a hint of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He turned to Caleb. "If the marshal isn't here by sunset, take her to the backup location." With a final nod to Dahlia, Sheriff Thornton mounted his horse and galloped toward Silver Creek. Watching him disappear around a bend in the trail, Dahlia couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him ride into danger once again on her behalf. "He'll be fine," Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts. "Sheriff's got 9 lives like a cat." They settled in to wait, taking shelter in one of the more intact mining shacks. Hours passed with no sign of the marshal or Sheriff Thornton. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Dahlia's anxiety grew. "Something's wrong," she finally said. "The marshal should have been here by now." Caleb nodded, his expression grim. "I'm thinking the same thing. We should move to the backup location before dark." As they prepared to leave, the distant sound of gunfire echoed from the direction of Silver Creek. Caleb's hand immediately went to his pistol. "That's not good," he muttered. "We have to help," Dahlia insisted, already moving toward her horse. "Sheriff's orders were clear, Miss Price. If something went wrong, I'm to get you to safety. And let him face whatever's happening alone." She shook her head firmly. "I won't run while he risks his life again." Caleb hesitated, visibly torn between his duty and his concern for his friend. "The sheriff would have my hide if anything happened to you. Then we'll just have to be careful," Dahlia replied, mounting her horse. "Are you coming?" After a moment's consideration, Caleb swung up onto his own horse. "Sheriff's going to kill me for this," he muttered, but there was a hint of admiration in his eyes as they set off toward Silver Creek. They approached the town cautiously, using the gathering dusk as cover. The gunfire had stopped, but an unusual number of horses were tethered outside the jailhouse, and lanterns burned in windows that should have been dark at this hour. "Something big is happening," Caleb whispered as they concealed their horses in a stand of trees on the outskirts of town. "Let me scout ahead." "I'm coming with you," Dahlia insisted. Recognizing the futility of arguing, Caleb simply nodded. They crept through the back streets of Silver Creek, avoiding the main thoroughfare where they might be recognized. As they neared the jailhouse, they could hear raised voices coming from within. "Don't care who you are, Marshal. In Silver Creek, we handle our own affairs." "That's Green," Dahlia whispered, recognizing the saloon owner's voice. "And that means the marshal made it after all," Caleb added. "But where's the sheriff?" They moved closer, finding a position beside an open window where they could see inside without being spotted. The jailhouse was crowded with men, including Elias Green and several of his associates. A distinguished-looking older man who must be the federal marshal stood his ground in the center of the room, facing down Green. But what made Dahlia's blood run cold was the sight of Sheriff Thornton, disarmed and seated in one of his own cells, his face bruised and bloody. "You're making a serious mistake," the marshal was saying. "Obstructing a federal investigation, assaulting a law officer, these are hanging offenses." Green laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "The only witnesses are you and a sheriff who's about to have a tragic accident while trying to escape custody. As for the investigation, without the school teacher's testimony, you have nothing." Dahlia felt Caleb tense beside her. "We need to get help," he whispered. "There's no time," she replied, her mind racing. "They're going to kill them both." Inside the jailhouse, Green was continuing his speech. "Silver Creek has been very profitable for me and my partners. We're not about to let an outsider sheriff and a federal busybody ruin that." "You won't get away with this," Sheriff Thornton said, his voice hoarse but steady. "The evidence doesn't disappear if you kill us." "Oh, but it does," Green smirked. "Your deputy has vanished with the schoolteacher and that so-called evidence. Once we find them, there will be nothing left to connect us to any wrongdoing." Caleb drew his pistol. "I need to create a diversion. When I do, get to the livery stable. There's a shotgun hidden in the tack room." "What are you going to do?" Dahlia asked, alarmed by the determination in his eyes. "Buy you some time." Before she could protest, Caleb had moved away, circling toward the front of the jailhouse. Dahlia waited, her heart pounding, until she heard Caleb's voice call out from the street. "Green, I've got your men from the hills here. They've got something to say about your operation." The distraction worked. Several men rushed from the jailhouse to confront the supposed threat, giving Dahlia the opportunity to slip away toward the livery stable. She found the shotgun exactly where Caleb had described, along with a box of shells. Though she had never fired such a weapon before, her father had taught her to shoot a rifle when she was younger. Loading the shotgun as her father had shown her, Dahlia steeled her nerves and headed back toward the jailhouse. The sound of gunfire told her that Caleb's diversion had escalated. She prayed he was all right as she approached from the rear of the building. The back door of the jailhouse was unguarded, the men inside presumably having rushed out front to join the fight. Dahlia slipped inside, finding herself in a small storeroom adjacent to the main office. Through the partially open door, she could see Sheriff Thornton still in his cell, with Green and one guard remaining inside. "Your deputy's loyalty will cost him his life," Green was saying to the sheriff, checking his pistol. "A shame, really. He could have had a place in our operation." Dahlia took a deep breath, raised the shotgun, and stepped into the doorway. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Green and his man whirled around, shock evident on their faces. "Well, well." "The schoolteacher returns," Green recovered quickly, his surprise turning to amusement. "Put down the scattergun, girl. You don't have the stomach for this." "Miss Price, get out of here," Sheriff Thornton called urgently from his cell. Dahlia kept the shotgun leveled at Green. "I'm not leaving without you, Sheriff. And Mr. Green, I assure you, I have the stomach for whatever is necessary to see justice done." Green's amusement faded, replaced by cold calculation. "You're outnumbered, girl. My men will be back any moment." "Actually," came a new voice from the front door, "your men are currently being disarmed by my deputies." Federal Marshal Jenkins stepped into the jailhouse, flanked by several armed men in dusters. Caleb followed, his face sporting a fresh cut but otherwise unharmed. "I suggest you follow the lady's instructions and drop your weapons," the marshal continued calmly. With the odds now decidedly against them, Green and his guard reluctantly disarmed. The marshal's men quickly took them into custody while Caleb retrieved the keys to the cell and released Sheriff Thornton. "I thought I told you to get her to safety," Sheriff Thornton said to Caleb as he stepped out of the cell, though there was more relief than anger in his voice. "She can be very persuasive," Caleb replied with a hint of a smile. "Besides, it looks like you needed the help." Sheriff Thornton turned to Dahlia, who still held the shotgun in trembling hands. Gently, he took it from her. "Thank you," he said softly. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen." "I learned from your example," she replied, the tension of the moment finally catching up with her as tears threatened. The marshal approached them. "Miss Price, I presume? I'm Federal Marshal Jenkins. I understand you have testimony that will be crucial to our case against these men." "Yes, Marshal, I do." "Good. We'll need to take your official statement, but that can wait until morning." He turned to Sheriff Thornton. "You should have a doctor look at those cuts, Thornton." "They can wait," the sheriff replied, his eyes not leaving Dahlia's face. "I need to make sure Miss Price is safe first." "I'd say she proved she can take care of herself," the marshal observed with an approving nod toward Dahlia. "But I'll have men posted outside your house tonight just to be sure." As the marshal and his deputies led Green and his men away, Sheriff Thornton, Caleb, and Dahlia remained in the jailhouse. "What happened?" Dahlia asked. "We waited for the marshal, but he never came." "Green's men intercepted him on the road," Sheriff Thornton explained, wincing slightly as he touched a cut on his lip. "They brought him to town at gunpoint. When I went to meet him, they ambushed me too." "If you hadn't come back when you did," Caleb added, "they would have killed them both and come looking for us next." Sheriff Thornton shook his head. "You shouldn't have taken that risk, either of you." "You took the same risk for me," Dahlia pointed out. "How could we do any less for you?" Something shifted in the sheriff's expression, a softening around his eyes that Dahlia hadn't seen before. Before he could respond, however, the door opened again to admit Dr. Wilson, the town physician. "Heard you might need patching up, Sheriff," the doctor said, setting down his bag. "Miss Price, good to see you safe. Town's been abuzz with rumors about your disappearance." As the doctor tended to Sheriff Thornton's injuries, Dahlia found herself overcome with exhaustion, the events of the past 2 days finally catching up with her. Caleb noticed her swaying slightly and guided her to a chair. "It's over now," he said reassuringly. "Green and his men are headed for federal prison. The marshal will make sure of it. What about my father's debts, my house?" Dahlia asked, suddenly remembering the practical concerns that had been overshadowed by more immediate dangers. "The marshal will declare the debt contracts fraudulent," Sheriff Thornton answered, flinching as the doctor cleaned a particularly deep cut. "Your property should be returned to you." Relief washed over Dahlia. The thought of returning to her home, of resuming her life and her teaching, seemed almost surreal after everything that had happened. "You should rest, Miss Price," the sheriff said, noticing her fatigue. "Caleb can escort you back to my house for the night. We can sort everything else out tomorrow." Too tired to argue, Dahlia allowed Caleb to lead her out of the jailhouse. As they walked through the now quiet streets, she looked up at the stars, feeling as though she was emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the light. "He cares for you, you know," Caleb said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Who?" Dahlia asked, though she knew perfectly well whom he meant. "The sheriff. I haven't seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you since Emma died." Dahlia felt her cheeks warm. "He was just doing his job, protecting a citizen of his town." Caleb chuckled. "Is that what you think? Zach Thornton doesn't spend $1,000 of his own money or risk his life repeatedly for just anyone, Miss Price. But don't tell him I said so. He'd have my badge." The implication of his words followed Dahlia into her dreams that night, mixing with memories of the sheriff's gentle hands cutting her bonds, his fierce determination to see justice done, and the softness in his eyes when he thanked her for coming back for him. The next morning, Dahlia gave her formal statement to Marshal Jenkins, detailing everything from her father's supposed debts to the auction and the subsequent events. The marshal listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, while Sheriff Thornton, looking somewhat better after a night's rest, sat nearby. "Your testimony is invaluable, Miss Price," the marshal said when she had finished. "Combined with your father's ledger and the evidence Sheriff Thornton has gathered, we have more than enough to ensure Green and his associates spend many years behind bars." "What happens now?" Dahlia asked. "Now we begin the process of setting things right," the marshal replied. "I've already declared all debt contracts associated with Green's operation to be null and void. Your property will be returned to you immediately." Relief washed over Dahlia. "And the others who were sold like I was? We're working to locate them all," Sheriff Thornton said. "Some were taken quite far afield, but the marshal has agents tracking them down. It may take time," the marshal added, "but we're committed to finding everyone and bringing them home." After the marshal left to continue processing the prisoners, Sheriff Thornton escorted Dahlia back to her family home. The small house on the edge of town looked just as she had left it, though a fine layer of dust covered everything inside. "It feels strange," she admitted as they stood in the parlor. "Like returning to a previous life. It will feel like home again soon enough," Sheriff Thornton assured her. Dahlia turned to face him. "I never properly thanked you, Sheriff. What you did for me," he raised a hand to stop her. "You saved my life yesterday, Miss Price. I'd say that more than balances the scales. Still, to spend so much of your own money—" "It was worth every penny," he said simply. Their eyes met, and for a moment Dahlia thought she saw something more than professional concern in his gaze. Then he blinked and stepped back slightly. "I should let you get settled," he said, his voice taking on its usual professional tone. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." As he turned to leave, Dahlia found herself reluctant to see him go. "Sheriff," he paused, looking back. "Would you? That is, I was planning to make supper tonight. Perhaps you might join me, as a proper thank you." Sheriff Thornton seemed surprised by the invitation, a hint of color appearing on his cheeks above his beard. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," Dahlia insisted. "Please, it would mean a lot to me." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Then I'd be honored, Miss Price. What time should I arrive?" 7 o'clock, I'll be here," he promised, and with a tip of his hat he was gone. Dahlia spent the afternoon cleaning her house and preparing for dinner, grateful for the familiar tasks that helped ground her after the chaos of recent days. She went to the general store, where Mr. Thompson welcomed her warmly, refusing to accept payment for her purchases when she explained they were for a dinner thanking the sheriff. "That man saved this town from Green's gang," the shopkeeper said firmly. "And he saved you, Miss Price. The least I can do is contribute to your thank you dinner." By 7, Dahlia had prepared a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. She had changed into her best dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and had just lit the lamps when a knock sounded at the door. Sheriff Thornton stood on her porch, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his clean shirt and vest, his badge polished to a shine. He had trimmed his beard and combed his hair and held his hat in his hands rather than wearing it. "Good evening, Miss Price," he said formally. "Please come in," Dahlia replied, suddenly feeling shy. "And I think after everything we've been through, you might call me Dahlia." He stepped inside, offering her a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Then you must call me Zachary or Zach. Only criminals and my sister call me Sheriff Thornton in that tone." Dahlia laughed, accepting the flowers. "These are lovely, thank you." As they sat down to dinner, the initial awkwardness between them gradually melted away. Zachary proved to be an engaging conversationalist when not in his official capacity, sharing stories of his time as a bounty hunter and tales of his childhood in Pennsylvania. "What brought you to Silver Creek?" Dahlia asked as they lingered over coffee after the meal. "It's quite a change from Pennsylvania." Zachary's expression grew more serious. "After Emma died, I needed a fresh start. The territorial governor was looking for someone to clean up Silver Creek. The previous sheriff had been in Green's pocket." He shrugged. "It seemed like the right place to make a difference. Your wife would be proud of what you've accomplished," Dahlia said softly. He looked up, surprise in his eyes. "How did you know about Emma?" "Caleb mentioned her, and I saw her photograph in your house." Dahlia hesitated. "I hope you don't mind." "No, I don't mind." He was quiet for a moment. "It's been 3 years, the pain. It changes. Becomes something you carry rather than something that cripples you." "My mother died when I was 16, Dahlia offered. "I understand that kind of grief." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, a new understanding growing between them. "Will you stay in Silver Creek now?" Dahlia finally asked, the question that had been on her mind all evening. "That depends," Zachary replied, his eyes meeting hers. "On what?" He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "On whether there's a reason to stay." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Dahlia found herself holding her breath, her heart beating faster. "I think," she said slowly, "that the town still needs its sheriff. The school still needs its teacher. Perhaps they could need each other too." Zachary's expression softened, a genuine smile transforming his face. "I'd like that, Dahlia. Very much." As the weeks passed, Silver Creek began to recover from Green's influence. The federal investigation uncovered the full extent of his operation, which had stretched across 3 territories. Many families returned to reclaim properties that had been seized unlawfully, and those who had been sold into servitude were gradually located and brought home. Dahlia resumed her teaching at the schoolhouse, finding comfort in the familiar routine and the eager faces of her students. In the evenings, she often found herself in Sheriff Thornton's company, sometimes for dinner at her house, other times for walks along the creek after which the town was named. Their relationship developed slowly, respectfully, both of them cautious after their respective losses. But there was an undeniable connection between them, forged in the crucible of danger they had faced together and strengthened by their shared commitment to justice. One evening in late summer, nearly 3 months after the events that had brought them together, Zachary invited Dahlia to ride out to his family's hunting cabin. The foothills were beautiful this time of year, he explained, and he wanted to show her some of his favorite places. They set out early, riding at a leisurely pace and enjoying the cooler air of the higher elevation. When they reached the cabin, Dahlia was struck by how different it looked in the golden light of a peaceful day compared to the tense circumstances of her first visit. "It's beautiful here," she said as they tethered their horses. "My father loved these hills," Zachary replied. "He taught me everything I know about tracking, hunting, surviving in the wilderness." They spent the afternoon exploring the surrounding area, with Zachary pointing out various landmarks and sharing stories of his childhood visits. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin, where Zachary built a fire and prepared a simple meal. After they had eaten, they sat outside on a rough-hewn bench, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Zachary said after a comfortable silence, "about the future." Dahlia turned to look at him, noting the unusual nervousness in his demeanor. "What about it?" "3 months ago I bought you at auction," he said, his voice low. "It was the only way I could think of to save you from Green, but it's haunted me ever since, the idea that even for a moment you were considered property." "You freed me immediately," Dahlia reminded him. "You never treated me as anything less than an equal. Still, it's not how I would have chosen for us to meet." He took her hand in his. "I'd like to replace that memory with a better one." Before Dahlia could ask what he meant, Zachary slid from the bench onto one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Dahlia Price, these past months have shown me that life can be full again, that the heart can heal and learn to love once more. I never expected to find someone who would brave gunfire to save me, who would match me in courage and conviction." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring with a modest diamond. "I'm not asking to own you or protect you. You've proven you're more than capable of protecting yourself. I'm asking if you would share your life with mine, as my wife, my partner, my equal." Tears sprang to Dahlia's eyes as she looked at the earnest face of the man before her, the man who had risked everything to save her from servitude, who had shown her the meaning of true justice and honor, and who now offered her his heart. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Zachary Thornton, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to sit beside her again, drawing her into a gentle kiss that carried all the promise of their future together. They were married a month later in the small church of Silver Creek, with Caleb standing as Zachary's best man and Rebecca Porter, Zachary's sister, coming from Pennsylvania to stand with Dahlia. The whole town turned out for the celebration, grateful to both the sheriff and the schoolteacher for their roles in freeing Silver Creek from Green's corruption. As a wedding gift, the townspeople surprised them with a newly built house on the edge of town, larger than Dahlia's family home but still modest, with a garden and a small stable for their horses. "A fresh start," Mayor Thompson said as he presented them with the key. "For the couple who gave our town its fresh start." In the years that followed, Sheriff and Mrs. Thornton became pillars of the Silver Creek community. Zachary continued to serve as sheriff, building a reputation throughout the territory as a fair and just lawman. Dahlia expanded the school, eventually hiring additional teachers as the town grew. Their first child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a son they called James after Dahlia's father. The Thornton home became known for its warm hospitality, with Caleb, now promoted to chief deputy, a regular visitor who delighted in playing the role of honorary uncle to the children. On the 5th anniversary of the day Zachary had purchased Dahlia's freedom, they returned to the hunting cabin in the foothills, leaving the children in Rebecca's care for the weekend. As they sat outside watching the sunset, just as they had the night of his proposal, Zachary put his arm around his wife and pulled her close. "You ever think about that day?" he asked. "The auction." Dahlia leaned against his shoulder, considering. "Sometimes. Not the fear or humiliation, but what came after. The cowboy who said I'd be free by dawn. Zachary chuckled. Caleb always did have a flair for the dramatic. He was right, though. By dawn, I had begun the journey to true freedom. She turned to look at her husband. And to you. I knew from the moment I saw you on that auction block that you were special, Zachary admitted. Your dignity, your courage even then. I told myself I was just doing my duty, but I think my heart knew better. Is that why you spent your entire savings to buy me? Dahlia teased gently. Best $1,000 I ever spent, he replied with a smile, leaning in to kiss her. Though if I'd known what I was getting, a woman who would face down armed men with a shotgun, who would build a school system from scratch, who would give me 2 beautiful children and fill my life with joy, I'd have paid 10 times that amount. Dahlia laughed, linking her fingers with his. Lucky for you, I was going cheap that day. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Zachary and Dahlia Thornton sat together in comfortable silence, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as an act of justice had blossomed into something far more precious, a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to face whatever challenges came their way together. In the small cabin where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other, they renewed their commitment to the life they had built in Silver Creek. And just as Zachary had once promised Dahlia her freedom by dawn, they promised each other a lifetime of the freedom that comes only from truly being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who they are.